I know that y'all are waiting on the other 12 for the other side, but since he's by himself, can you go ahead and give his statement?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay. All right, so just, I mean, first of all, just give us your statement on this one, the 200.
absolutely. The voters of Gwinnett voted on March 19th and opposed the martyr referendum that was proposed. And this legislation here today is simply for the purpose of honoring and respecting the voice of Gwinnett County voters. Gwinnett County voters spoke in a bipartisan manner in opposition to the martyr referendum. This was not a small turnout in this election. It was a larger turnout than in the general primary election in 2018 when all of Georgia's voters turned out to vote for governor. More people voted in the March 19th Gwinnett County MARTA referendum than in that election last year. And so this was a strong message. And if we respect the voice of the voters of Gwinnett County, then we have to respect the outcome of that election. It's disingenuous to call as many elections as is necessary to get the desired outcome. We have to respect when the voters turn out and in a bipartisan manner oppose this proposal to bring MARTA to Gwinnett County. There are other means by which transit can be considered and passed. House Bill 930, passed with bipartisan support in 2018, would allow for transit to be considered and passed in Gwinnett County. And this legislation does nothing to stop that availability. That can still be considered going forward. But if we respect the rights of the voters to, when they cast their ballot, expect that it's going to be honored by their elected officials, well then whether you support the outcome or you don't, it must be respected. And we must honor the message that they sent to us. And that is what this legislation is for the purpose of here today.
So why is there a need for this in terms of respect? I mean, would local elected officials decide to bring it up or not? So why is there a need here?
Right. Local elected officials immediately said, even the evening that the election was, the returns were coming in, that there was displeasure with the outcome and therefore another election should be called immediately. And the point of this is, if we're going to call elections, put this to voters, then we must honor and respect the outcome of those elections. Otherwise, elected leaders are simply having their way if they call as many votes as are needed in order to get the outcome that he or she wants.
So some on the county commission aren't respecting the will of the voters in your mind?
Gwinnett voters sent a clear message. They, on March 19th, turned out overwhelmingly to oppose the martyr referendum. It was not a close outcome. And it was throughout the county that the opposition occurred. Republicans and Democrats rejected the proposal. To simply call another election because certain elected officials just dislike the outcome, I think fails to respect the will of the voters and their voice and their importance in the process.
Just from one thing I've kind of heard, it seems like some of the members weren't alerted to the fact that you were bringing this forth, so how would you respond to that concern that they weren't notified?
Sure. The Gwinnett County delegation took I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. Please let me know. I'm happy to let you talk next if you'd like. Yeah.
Maybe we can talk together.
Well,
if that's okay.
If it'd be all right, I'll
I think
answer
you
the
can.
question.
Okay,
I'll answer the question first, if I could just have the ability to do that. The Gwinnett County delegation was willing to take, many members were willing to take very public positions. I respected the voters' will, and I purposely did not provide a public position for or against the martyr referendum because I thought voters should have the opportunity to make that decision. There are other members who you'll hear from today who took very public positions in their official governmental role, which I personally did not agree with, but they decided to do that. They now are likely speaking in opposition to this proposal, this Senate Bill 200 that's been proposed. And my response is that if your stated opinion about the election was known and was public at the time, there ought to be an opportunity for members to say, the voters spoke and we should respect the message that the voters sent to us on March 19th. This was not a small margin. It was an overwhelming margin, and the turnout exceeded the general primary from 2018. This was a large turnout in this election.
How did you come up with 2026?
So traditionally, there has been, if a martyr referendum has failed, there's been a 10-year period or more before another referendum is called. By putting this out 7 years, it's much more generous. It allows for the local government to call another vote much more sooner than the traditional 10 or more years waiting for another referendum to be called.
So you see it as a compromise?
I do, yeah. I believe that it's a very reasonable proposal in that respect, but certainly the legislative process is all about input from other legislators who think that, sometimes think differently. And so that debate and discussion is very important in the legislative process.
Are you open to maybe amending that?
The proposal that I put forward is to respect the will of the voters, the voice that the voters have when they sent a clear message in opposition to the martyr referendum. And any other legislator who wants to be a partner or wants to try to make the legislation even better, of course, I look forward to working with them.
How soon do you expect this to reach a vote?
Well, the Senate Bill 200 is on the floor for consideration right now. And so I expect that it could be called for a vote either today or on Tuesday. These are the final 2 days of the legislative session. So for it to be passed this year, it would have to pass either today or on Tuesday. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
And good afternoon. I'm State Representative Pedro Marin. I'm the chair of the Gwinnett Delegation. And as you see, I cannot speak too much because of laryngitis. But yes, we heard, thank you, Representative Efstration, for giving your thoughts about why SB 200 is so important. But we're going to hear from other members to see why we don't need this right now. And yes, we had a referendum in March. Only 17% of Gwinnett voted. That's not truly a majority. The delegation has 18 members. 6 only are signing on this bill. So again, clearly, it's not a majority. So with that, I'm going to turn it to the vice chair of the delegation, Representative Sam Park.
All right, so thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Representative Efstration, for your remarks. We do have a lineup of speakers, and I'll close it out, and we'll take questions after that. So first up, Representative Mcleod.
Thank you, Vice Chair Parks. You know, as a resident of 40 years in Gwinnett County, I'd just like to say that when this vote came about, when we went to the commissioners, we felt at that time it was voter suppression. You know, instead of having the election on November like we should have had it in November, we decided to push it to March. And at that time, we knew it was voter suppression. What you had in November, you had 315,000 Gwinnettians vote in March. You had 91,000 Gwinnettians vote in March. November, you had 315,000. March, you had 91,000. Now, that's when the will of the people was speaking. And yes, we all talked about that this bill, this transit, this martyr should have been in November. But all it was voter suppression. That's all it had to have been, voter suppression. But at that time I always would say that the will of the people will speak because they did speak. When I came to this body in 2013, I say that only that there were 12 Republican legislators and 6 Democrats. Now there are 12 Democratic legislators and 6 Republicans. And the only ones that were offered to be on that bill was the 6 Republicans. And I spoke to Representative Efstration, and he said to me, the reason I didn't ask because I knew you didn't agree. I know you wouldn't agree, but at least ask. At least ask. At least know for a fact. Have that factual. Don't have it to be that I assume that you would say no, because yes, transit in Gwinnett, we need it. We are 1 million strong in Gwinnett. We have no transit. So at that, I'm going to leave it for the rest of my colleagues to speak because I don't want to talk about the economic impact. I just want to talk about the mobility. In fact, the employers are saying they can have any way to get people there. So with that in mind, we should have had this vote in November. It was coming back in November, but the way that we're looking at 7 years of cooling off, what kind of cooling off could that be? You could be frozen 7 years. So all I'm saying to you all is, to the people of Gwinnett, we will speak again in 2020. And for those who are on that piece of paper, watch out.
So Representative Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Good afternoon. I want to highlight the fact that I have had prominent business leaders of Gwinnett, and when we speak about this amendment being bad for our county, it is bad for Gwinnetians as our voters, but it's also bad for our business and economic development. One of the most important points that someone highlighted to me is that this is the one thing that can kill economic development in Gwinnett County. Other than the fact that the majority of the delegation was not notified, even if we happen to have disagreed, that was simply not notified to be able to gather information, provide more facts, speak to our constituents so that we could then provide that information to those that might support this amendment to maybe rethink possibly their position. Beyond the fact that that is the case, the county commissioners were not notified. The chair of the county commission was not notified. The Gwinnett Chamber was not notified. Business leaders of Gwinnett County were not notified. Gwinnett Republican business leaders were not notified. And the question this morning to me was, why are you the only person that has called me and brought this to my attention? This amendment to this bill has nothing to do with the will of Gwinnett, nor is it to the benefit of Gwinnett voters. It was already highlighted, but is it important to note that we insisted that this referendum not take place in a special election because we understand. And the real disingenuous thing to say is that this represents the majority of the will of the people when, as has been highlighted, we have had 17% turnout. Granted, higher than most special elections, higher than the primary runoff, not the primary. That may be the case. But nonetheless, no one here and no reasonable person would say that a 17% turnout by any means of the imagination represents the majority of the will of people. We all know and we all are very aware that special elections are very difficult to bring folks out to vote. And we should leave it to the county commission and us individually, if we have some a difference of opinion, to bring to their attention why or why not a referendum should be held again or not. I'll leave on one last point. Imagine if we start telling any county or counties that they cannot have their SPLOST again after 7 years if it happens to fail. How would we actually be able to tell individuals that we would not permit a SPLOST to be voted on again after it's failed, especially during a special election? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Parks. I'm Gregg, Kennard, District 102, which represents Lawrenceville and Suwannee up in Gwinnett County. I agree with voter suppression, but it's via voter fatigue. March 19th represented the 5th election that we asked for our Gwinnett citizens to show up for since May of last year, the 5th election time to show up to vote. There's no question that if this had been on the ballot in November, it would have passed hands down, but that was actually part of the tactic to kick it out to a standalone election when there would be voter fatigue, not as much representation. That was done by a couple of, as I understand it, done by a couple of commissioners that held the rest of the board because they were resistant to the beautiful things that are happening in Gwinnett County, and this is just another move to keep the old guard in with Gwinnett County. We all represent the new Gwinnett County. We believe in what's happening, and MARTA and transit is a big part of this new Gwinnett picture.
Representative Hutchinson, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Shelly Hutchinson. I am State Representative for House District 107. And I just wanted to say how incredibly disappointed as a freshman to come into this body during this session and to have such a disregard for the democratic process. There's been many times that as a freshman I've been shocked, but I've not been as shocked as I was today. We all recommended that this vote be taken in November. We were shot down. At the cost to Gwinnett County, we had a special election with voter fatigue that cost us more than $1 million. 17% came out. That is not a majority. When I was driving to the Capitol this morning, I got a text about this. That is completely disrespectful. It's like we don't exist. It's like new voices do not exist. Not only were we not asked, even if we were to say something, we're not listened to. And if, as a social worker and as a therapist, if you ever did that to your family, to your friends, and to your children, you would have big, big problems. And I don't see this as any different. So I am in complete opposition of this, and I'll be speaking to this more on the floor. Thank you.
Representative Mcleod, please introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Representative Donna Mcleod. I represent 105, District 105. It covers part of Bethlehem, part of Tequila, part of Lawrenceville, part of Grayson, part of Loganville. And I wanted to talk about just the referendum itself. If we were talking about money and wasting money, we had talked about this being a costly venture and that should have been on the November ballot. But the county refused, and so we went along, and we knew it was going to be more than $500,000. But at this stand, I think it's almost $1 million that we actually spent on this, and to no avail that we went to a position where the voters did not turn out from fatigue. But it's the other issue is that the disrespect that was shown to us as new members, and we've been trying to do our best to work with all our colleagues in the body. I want people to understand this as well. There are real people affected by transportation. I have enough emails to prove to you that this is not the will of the people. I have emails, people begging me, please, I need transportation. I need to get to work. When I was out canvassing, I had supervisors at Kroger asking for transportation because they're having problems keeping employees because of transportation. It's economics as well. If you don't have empathy for people, you shouldn't be in this business, because not everything that you do will affect you. It's going to affect others as well. And sometimes you have to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's real. These people need to get the transportation. We are 30 years behind in Gwinnett County for transportation because of resistance. Pure resistance with no factual basis. There are people that still think Gwinnett County is about 400,000 people living there. Gwinnett County is almost 1 million people living there. And I can tell you, coming down here, it's almost a 2-hour drive to get here. This is unacceptable. It's time that we really sit down and talk about what is really needed for people, not just on the vote. And I believe in representative democracy, but that vote is not a representative of what happened in this county and what people need in this county. So I am very disappointed. I will be speaking on this bill, against this bill, and there will be reckoning in November of 2020.
Hi, my name is Representative Beth Moore from District 95. I'm also the secretary of the Gwinnett Delegation. Part of the reason why I ran for the position of Secretary of the Delegation is because I wanted to participate in a conversation that would be bipartisan for the best interests of the people of Gwinnett County. So I am highly disappointed that a portion of our delegation has put forth this amendment without talking to the rest of the delegation. You know, those who know me know that I live in a bipartisan marriage. And people always ask us if we just argue all of the time, me and my husband. And the truth is, no, we don't. In fact, we agree on almost, I'd say 90% of everything. And we talk to each other. That's how a marriage works. That's how relationships work. That is how our delegation should work. And I have always made myself available, and I've been respectful to both the Democratic and Republican members of our delegation in order to, build those relationships and build that conversation and build that bipartisanship. because I live in a bipartisan district. And, you know, I respect the outcome of the MARTA referendum. I think that sent a message to the county commission that, okay, look, the first plan didn't work. Let's go back and revisit the plan and come back with a new proposal, right? That's how government works, right? So to put a 7-year moratorium on any kind of new plan will only set Gwinnett back and does not engender the type of relationship that I would like to have with not only my colleagues down here at the House, but also in the Senate and at the county level, that we should talk to each other, right? The 7-year moratorium is putting an end to the conversation, and I object to that. And I ask that my fellow colleagues in the House reject this, and Chuck, Representative Efstration, all the other Republican members who signed this amendment, my offer still stands, that we can still talk about this. But let's set this amendment aside and come back to the table. That is my invitation to you. All right, thank you.
Representative Kendrick.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dar'shun Kendrick. I represent State House District 93. It's East DeKalb and South Gwinnett. And I also serve as the Chief Deputy Whip of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. So I happened to be in the Rules Committee this morning, happened to be presenting a bill, and imagine my surprise when I had to learn about this amendment for the first time during the Rules Committee meeting. When I first got elected here in 2010, I really understood and was appreciative of the fact that I was going into a professional body, one that I thought would hold up standards of professionalism and respect for its members. And so I am more than frustrated that the first time I had to learn about this amendment was in the Rules Committee. I think that we owe it to our constituents. We owe it to each other to make sure that this whole process, you can disagree with the outcome, but if the process is not transparent, if it's not clear, if there is not respect in the process, I cannot support the outcome no matter what it is, because we're out all down here with rules, and we're out all down here with processes. And so for me, being an attorney and then to have the author be an attorney, I just think that we should go back to the drawing board, as Representative Beth Moore said, so that we can get this process correct. Because if the process is tainted, the outcome does not matter. And so I urge my Republican colleagues who signed on to this bill without alerting the rest of the delegation to let's go back to the drawing board, let's fix this. Because Gwinnett can be great, but we have to start talking to each other, and we have to make sure that whatever we decide for Gwinnett County, that we've had a thoughtful process and we've not left anybody out. Gwinnett County is too big to leave any one of us out. We all got elected the same exact way, and we represent the same amount of people in Gwinnett County. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that this process is transparent, that it's done the correct way, so that the outcome we can say, no matter your politics, the outcome is one way, but at least we did the process correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kendrick. So my name is Sam Park. I have the honor of representing House District 101. I also have the privilege of serving as the vice chair of the Gwinnett delegation today. So as a lot of my colleagues mentioned, a lot of us are blindsided about this amendment, which we first heard of today, as this bill is on the floor today. Not only were members of the Gwinnett delegation surprised by this amendment, there are many folks in Gwinnett County, in terms of both the elected officials, members from chambers of commerce who have reached out to us, who have expressed concern about this issue, because this is not a partisan issue, right? We've seen partisan politics injected into this issue, but we're talking about transit. We're talking about economic development for decades that would benefit everyone in Gwinnett County, regardless of partisanship. Now, there has been discussion about respecting the will of the majority of the people in Gwinnett County. I respect the voters who voted against the MARTA referendum on March 19th. But that was 10 days ago. When we're talking about a cooling off period regarding this issue, how are we to propose trying to cool down on this issue by placing a 7-year moratorium on this issue when 7 days from that special election have not even passed for folks in Gwinnett who are all affected by this issue to come to some sort of an agreement? Now, if we truly respect the majority or the will of the people in Gwinnett, right, we ought to give them an opportunity to vote on this issue, right? And the easiest way in which we could do so is to have this ballot referendum on a general election in November, as we could have done in November 2018. There are political implications to having this issue on a general election ballot, but those are political implications. Now, I think there is a question that has to be asked as to whether or not we are putting the self-interest of ourselves before the long-term interests of those who live in Gwinnett who could be affected by this issue. The clearest statistic that pops out to me over and over and over again is 64% of eligible voters in Gwinnett turned out during the November 2018 election. That is a majority of eligible voters in Gwinnett. 17% turned out on this special election. So we have not heard what the majority of voters in Gwinnett feel about this issue. And we've also talked about bipartisanship. There was clear bipartisan support for expanding transit to Gwinnett County, from the county commission to the chambers of commerce to all the businesses who are working together with Democrats, having town halls throughout the county, trying to educate voters on this issue. But again, from voter fatigue to the lack of understanding that sometimes happens with new voters and voting in special elections, right? Let's be, let's keep it simple. Let's keep it clear. If we truly want to hear the majority of the people in Gwinnett on this issue, let's give them that opportunity in November. Now, from a procedural standpoint, this bill could be voted upon today. This bill, if it does pass, would still have to go over to the Senate. So while a lot of us were blindsided and disappointed in the manner in which this amendment was proposed and passed out of rules, we will continue to debate this issue because there's too much at stake. So with that, I'd be happy to open it up to questions that folks may have.
I've got a question, but it's actually for Chuck, Representative Efstration.
All right.
After he heard all this
Sure.
firsthand, the complaints not just about the actual underlying issue, but also the process, and Democrats are saying they feel betrayed. What do you say to all this? Now you've heard this.
We've always had a great bipartisan relationship in the Gwinnett County Legislative Delegation. I previously served as chairman of the Gwinnett County House Legislative Delegation, and a Democrat, Representative Bennett, served as our vice chairman. When Democrats took a majority, that was not available as an option this year. Democrats wanted all of the officer positions. So any argument that this is in any way a partisan issue or we've acted in a partisan manner is just completely not the case. In fact, to the contrary, the proposal here in Senate Bill 200 respects and honors the voice, the Democratic voice of the voters of Gwinnett who turned out in large margin to reject the proposal. To simply continue to call this referendum over and over again until these elected officials get their desired result is disingenuous and not fair to the voters who took the time to turn out and express their will. And I think that any argument that this is in any way procedurally deficient, I think has real issues. The procedural deficiency here is calling for a vote, which the county commission did, on a date that the county commission selected, and then not being happy with the outcome of the vote, and here 10 days later calling for another vote. And these calls were even occurring at the time. We just heard from Representative Park, who said that there are political implications. This legislation that my colleagues and I have proposed are not here to discuss political implications. We're only here to honor and respect the bipartisan vote and the large turnout that we saw in Gwinnett County on March 19th. And I see two of my other colleagues are here in the back of the room in support of this measure. This proposal is simply for that purpose. And any argument here today that there's been some procedural flaw, I'd argue is inconsistent with the facts. All right, this vote happened in Gwinnett County 10 days ago, right, on March 19th. That was when the outcome was known. Of course, we're late in the legislative process at this point, and the ability for a member to propose and carry legislation that he or she believes is appropriate and follows the will of the people is always available, and that's something that we each have been elected to do. I respect each and every voice on this issue. I respect each of my colleagues, but I also respect the voters of Gwinnett County who weighed in on this issue. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to respect the message that they sent. Thank you.
Why not talk to the rest of the delegation about this before it seems like that's a big blindsided?
So many members of the delegation decided to really weigh in on this issue in a public way. And I think that there was a great concern about elected officials who are in their official capacity trying to direct voter outcomes in referendums. I did not participate in that whatsoever. I deliberately did not weigh in on what the outcome of the election would be. There are some of my colleagues who felt that that was what he or she ought to do. And I'm not here to speak about that. I'm simply recognizing the fact that an important message was sent by the voters of Gwinnett County. And we're all very familiar with this issue. The Gwinnett House delegation has taken members have taken some very public positions previously about this issue. And the importance of honoring the voice of the voters is incumbent upon each of us as elected officials. And that is the only purpose of Senate Bill 200 as amended.
I got one more for you.
Yes, sir.
Republican Chairwoman Charlotte Nash told us she was also blindsided by the time they made this.
That's not what Chuck said.
Well, she told Tyler Estes that, but I don't know.
That's what she told us, though.
But shouldn't it be up to Gwinnett, shouldn't this be a local issue? What do you make of the argument that this should be, we're not right now a Republican-controlled commission, should it be up to them or should it be up to the state legislature to make this?
First of all, I disagree that she was blindsided by this. So that's the first thing. All right. The second issue is that our local elected officials work every day on behalf of individuals that elected them to office, and I respect local control. But when we have so recent an issue like this that's been on the ballot that came about because of state law, that was not just years ago debated, but we're talking about legislation that has been before this body and considered recently. It's important that we continue to consider how that state law is being implemented. And this is something that I think is very important and hasn't been maybe discussed fully here today. This is not a debate that you're seeing here about transit. There is support for transit across the legislative delegation. I voted in favor of House Bill 930. I remain in support of the concept of transit. And under existing law right now, there is the means by which the county commission can call for another referendum next year or as soon as the county commission might want to achieve some of the objectives that have been discussed here today. Now, this issue here is only about calling the same vote over and over and over again, hoping to get a certain desired result. There are other avenues to go, which I expect there will be complete bipartisan support to achieve. But you haven't heard that today, unfortunately, and I submit to you that through House Bill 930, that maybe is the direction that the legislative delegation and the entire House should look as the county commission considers that issue going forward. All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say one thing.
Oh,
if
yes.
you don't mind. So Timothy Barr, State Representative 103. And there's been some things here today, and as my colleague here has mentioned, we're not against transit, right? I think that this feels like we are against transit. We are not. There are other options. But the important thing that I want to talk about is many of my colleagues here have talked about voter suppression. And when we talk about voter suppression, in our brain we think about folks being barred from the polls. And so if that happened anywhere, it is extremely serious, and I need to know about it. And then number two, the cordiality of the caucus. When Dewey McLean left the podium, he told us to watch out, those who signed that. And so I'd just like to see if you wanted to clarify that. It doesn't feel like a very cordial amongst colleagues, and wondered if you wanted to clarify your statements.
Representative Lopez want to answer as an attorney.
I want to answer that because I wanted to make it really clear that what we mean by that is that this is yet another issue that we're going to present our voters in November of 2020 to make sure that we flip those seats so that we continue to ensure that we don't have the best interest of Gwinnetians at heart, which is really the true essence of the problem of this amendment. And that's what we mean by that.
So I just wanted to add, if
Didn't say that. Dewey called us out, and he said, the signers of this bill
Excuse-
better watch out.
Let me say this again. I've lived in Gwinnett for 40 years. I moved there in 1976. We didn't have, there were 70,000 people in Gwinnett County. At that time, there was not, we didn't have a transit problem. And right now, as when I came in this house in 2012, there were 12 Republicans and 6 Democrats in this delegation of 18. Today, as you look at this delegation, as my colleague has said, there are 12 Democrats and 6 Republicans. And what I said in 2020 was, when I said watch out, because again, the voters of Gwinnett will make a decision, and it's already out that who supports Gwinnett should be there supporting Gwinnett. For some reason, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not supporting the Gwinnetian. You're supporting 17%, but you're forgetting about the others. And so therefore, what I'm saying to you is the voters won't forget about you.
All right. Just a few more follow-up comments. Again, this is an issue that is too important for the future of Gwinnett County, and this is something that we need to get right. From a process standpoint, right? Just to clarify, there was every opportunity for this issue to have been placed on the November 2018 ballot. I still have not heard a legitimate, justifiable reason as to why this was placed on a special election 10 days ago, knowing that turnout would be much lower, okay? So again, I thank everyone for being here. One more thing I would mention is this MARTA contract that we are talking about approving, this was deliberated for months. The public had an opportunity to express their opinion on this contract as well. This was public information. From those who say that they are in support of transit, but pushing this bill, I have yet to see a proposal from them that would help expand transit or that would help replace this MARTA contract. All right? Again, this is too important of an issue for a small minority to simply say no. The rest of the entire county of 1 million people cannot have another opportunity to have their voice on this issue. We are not trying to advocate for a vote over and over and over and over again. We have had one vote on a special election where only 17% of voters turned out. All we want is an opportunity for the majority of voters in Gwinnett to have their say on this issue. We want to make it easy for them. And our voters, some of them had to wait 3 to 5 hours in line just to vote during these past special elections, right? There is a special city council election in Snellville where you had to vote in one location for MARTA, for the MARTA referendum, and another location to vote for your city councilman, right? There are issues in terms of how easy it is for voters in Gwinnett to vote. So again, this is not a partisan issue. It's unfortunate that there is partisan politics being injected into it, but I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, including elected officials at the local level, to get this issue right moving forward. So thank you so much again.
I know one question. If you do get another vote and you prevail, would you be against having a third vote by the Republicans so that they could knock your vote out?
Look, I would be fine having one more vote on this issue in November 2020, right? If it fails, it fails, right? Let's start over at that time. But at the very least, we will know that the majority of eligible voters in Gwinnett have spoken, right? This Democratic majority was elected by a majority of voters in Gwinnett that ought to be respected as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Are you all willing to negotiate with Representative Efstration regarding the timing of this cooling off period?
There wasn't really an opportunity for us to even come to the table, right? This was introduced, added to SB 200, and it was passed through the Rules Committee, and we can vote on this on the House floor when we come back.
And rules as well.
So that's enough.
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, thank you again.